I retired, all I knew was defending my end zone.
I didn't know what to do. I always had my guard up.
Ready to tear someone's head off.
Then I stopped settling for safe-ish and got safe with ADT.
With 24/7 monitoring,
What's up, Brian?
I'm more relaxed than ever.
And I don't have my head on the swivel anymore. Oh, a black cat chickadee.
I had a whole defensive scheme to keep it safe-ish.
Woo! And safe-ish wasn't good enough. Oh, hey!
Hey, Bam Bam!
What's going on?
Because now when it comes to protecting my house, I use ADT. Coming through! No, not in my house!
Oh, a cat!
I bumped into him accidentally, Catherine said, setting down her wine glass with that practiced elegance she'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. Her manicured fingers traced the rim while she avoided my eyes. Just a coincidence, William. You know how small this city can be. I nodded from across our granite kitchen island, watching her performance. My wife had always been theatrical, came with the territory of being a successful attorney, I suppose. But this particular show felt different, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this exact conversation in front of our bedroom mirror. Richard Thornton, I said, testing the name on my tongue. Your ex from law school, the CEO of Meridian Holdings, that Richard. The very same. She smiled, that perfect smile that had charmed judges and juries for years. He was at the Gilded Fork having lunch. I was meeting Janet about the charity committee. Pure coincidence. Coincidence. That word would haunt me for months. Catherine continued her story, painting a picture of innocent small talk between old friends. How Richard looked exactly the same after 20 years. How they'd caught up on mutual acquaintances. How he'd mentioned his company was looking for legal representation, and maybe they should discuss it sometime. I listened, nodding at appropriate intervals, making the right sounds. But my mind was calculating. The Gilded Fork was downtown, 15 minutes from Catherine's law firm. Janet lived on the opposite side of town. Why would they meet there for charity committee business? Did you give him your card? I asked. Of course. Networking, darling. You understand business. I understood business perfectly. I'd built Blackwood Automotive from a single garage into a chain of 7 locations across 3 counties, started with nothing but calloused hands and a willingness to work 18-hour days. Catherine used to joke that I could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. She stopped making those jokes when her salary started eclipsing mine. When's your next charity meeting? I asked casually, loading our dinner plates into the dishwasher. Tuesday, same as always. Janet insists on consistency. Tuesday. I filed that away. Our son Ethan wandered into the kitchen, 17 and perpetually hungry. He grabbed leftover pizza from the refrigerator, heating it in the microwave while scrolling through his phone. Our daughter Olivia appeared moments later, 15 and armed with the dramatic flair that made every minor inconvenience feel apocalyptic. Mom, can I go to Ashley's party Friday? Olivia asked, not looking up from her own device. We'll discuss it, Catherine replied, already gathering her briefcase and files. I need to review depositions tonight. Important case. She kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like checking a box than showing affection, and disappeared into her home office. The door clicked shut with finality. Ethan looked at me with those observant eyes he'd inherited from my side of the family. Everything okay, Dad? Just fine, son. Just fine. But everything wasn't fine. Something had shifted in our house over the past few months. Catherine stayed later at the office. She guarded her phone like state secrets. She'd started wearing perfume to work, not the subtle scent she'd worn for years, but something new, something that whispered rather than spoke. That night, I lay in bed listening to Catherine's breathing, wondering when we'd stop talking about real things. When had our conversations become nothing but logistics and scheduling? When had I become a roommate instead of a husband? Tuesday came with autumn rain and the kind of gray sky that made everything feel ominous. I was at the West Side location, training a new mechanic on transmission repair, when my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Running late tonight. Charity meeting might go long. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, something cold settling in my chest. The new mechanic, Tommy, was asking about torque specifications, but his voice seemed distant. Everything felt distant, except that text message. "Tommy, take lunch early," I said. "I need to run an errand." The Gilded Fork occupied a converted Victorian mansion downtown, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs. The kind of place that charged $30 for what my grandmother would have called a decent lunch. I parked across the street, feeling ridiculous and paranoid. But there she was. Catherine's silver BMW pulling into the valet circle at exactly 12:15. She emerged wearing the navy suit I'd complimented that morning, but she'd added a silk scarf I'd never seen before. She moved with purpose, checking her reflection in the restaurant's windows before disappearing inside. I waited, told myself I was being an idiot, that I should drive back to the shop and forget this nonsense. But something kept me planted in that parking spot, watching the entrance like a private investigator in a bad movie. 12 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled up. Richard Thornton stepped out, and I recognized him immediately from the business section of our local paper. Tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of suit that cost more than most people made in a month. He handed his keys to the valet with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never worried about money. My hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks. They emerged together 2 hours later, walking close, but not touching. Professional distance maintained for any observers. But I saw the way Catherine tilted her head when she laughed, the way Richard's hand lingered on her elbow as they reached the valet stand. I followed Richard's Mercedes from a distance, staying 3 cars back like I'd seen in movies. He didn't head toward his office building or home. Instead, he turned into the parking lot of the Grandview Hotel, a boutique place that catered to business travelers with expense accounts. Catherine's BMW was already there. The pieces clicked together with mechanical precision. The Tuesday charity meetings that had started 3 months ago, the new perfume, the late nights and guarded phone, the way she'd been distant but somehow energized, like she was living a secret life that actually excited her. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, engine running, heat blasting against the October chill. Part of me wanted to storm into that hotel, demand answers, make a scene, but another part, the part that had learned patience from years of diagnosing complex mechanical problems, told me to gather more information first. Accidents don't happen on schedule, but affairs apparently do. I drove back to the shop and threw myself into work, changing oil and rotating tires with more aggression than either task required. Tommy wisely stayed out of my way, focusing on his transmission project while I muttered profanities at perfectly innocent spark plugs. That evening, Catherine returned home at 8:30, claiming the charity meeting had been productive but exhausting. She'd changed clothes somewhere. The navy suit was gone, replaced by the casual slacks and blouse she usually wore to the office on Fridays. "How was your day?" she asked, the question automatic and hollow. "Productive," I replied, watching her face for any sign of guilt or discomfort. "Fixed a transmission, taught Tommy about torque specs, the usual." She nodded, already moving toward the stairs. "I'm going to shower and review some files. Don't wait up." Don't wait up. The phrase she'd been using more frequently lately. I waited until I heard the shower running, then quietly opened her purse. Catherine had always been organized to the point of obsession. Everything had its place, every receipt filed, every appointment noted. But tucked behind her credit cards was a small piece of paper with GH-237 written in her careful handwriting. Grandview Hotel, room 237. The shower was still running. I photographed the note with my phone, then carefully returned everything to its original position. By the time Catherine emerged from the bathroom in her silk robe, I was downstairs watching the news, looking for all the world like a devoted husband, waiting for his wife to join him for their evening routine. But routines, I was learning, could be deceptive. And accidents, despite what Catherine claimed, definitely had patterns. The anonymous email arrived on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing inventory reports at the main shop. The subject line read simply, "Thought you should know." No sender name, just a generic email address that could have belonged to anyone. I almost deleted it. Spam filters weren't perfect, and I got plenty of unwanted messages about extended warranties and miracle supplements. But something made me click it open instead. What I found made my coffee taste like ash. Attached were dozens of documents. Expense reports from Meridian Holdings showing regular charges at the Gilded Fork and Grandview Hotel. Credit card statements with Tuesday patterns stretching back 4 months. A calendar screenshot showing weekly appointments labeled Client Meeting, CB, in Richard Thornton's schedule. CB, Catherine Blackwood. But the most damning piece was a simple spreadsheet titled Tuesday Pattern Analysis. Someone had meticulously documented every charge, every date, every detail. Lunch at the Gilded Fork, $127.43. Hotel room at Grandview, $289 plus tax. Duration, approximately 3 hours. Frequency, weekly, barring holidays and business travel. 52 Tuesdays documented with the precision of an accountant and the dedication of someone with a serious grudge. The email included a single line of text. Accidents don't repeat every Tuesday for a year. Some of us notice patterns. Some of us remember being treated poorly. Some of us keep excellent records. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, then printed everything. The evidence filled 17 pages of documentation that painted a picture more detailed than any private investigator could have compiled. Someone with access to Richard's corporate accounts had been building this case methodically, waiting for the right moment to detonate it. My phone rang. Colin Murphy, my oldest friend and the owner of Iron Will Boxing Gym, where I'd been taking out my frustrations 3 times a week for the past 2 months. "You sound like garbage," he said without preamble. "Rough night?" You could say that. I glanced around the shop, making sure none of my employees were within earshot. "Can you meet me for lunch? I need advice." The kind of advice that requires beer, or the kind that requires bail money? Hopefully just beer. Colin had been a police detective for 15 years before opening his gym. He understood evidence, patterns, and human nature in ways that most people never would. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, it would be him. We met at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar that served decent burgers and minded its own business. I spread the printed documents across our corner table while Colin studied them with the methodical attention he'd once applied to case files. "Professional job," he said finally. "Whoever compiled this knows what they're doing. See how they cross-reference the hotel charges with the calendar entries? And the way they documented the restaurant receipts against corporate expense policies? This isn't some jealous spouse with a camera phone. This is someone with access and expertise. The email mentioned being treated poorly, someone with a grudge against Richard. Makes sense, disgruntled employee probably, someone who handles his expenses and got tired of watching him use company money for personal recreation." Colin took a long pull from his beer. "Question is, what are you going to do with this information?" That was the question, wasn't it? I had evidence of my wife's affair documented with legal precision. I could confront Catherine, demand explanations, file for divorce. The traditional route that would lead to lawyers and mediators and splitting assets while our kids watch their family implode. Or I could think strategically. "Richard's married," I said. "Elizabeth Thornton. Comes from old money, sits on half the charity boards in town. Their wedding was in the society pages 15 years ago." Colin had always been good with details. "She's also known for having a temper and expensive lawyers. And he's using company funds for his extramarital activities, which violates most corporate ethics policies. Meridian Holdings is publicly traded, right? Their board wouldn't appreciate this kind of exposure. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more focused. 3 different audiences with 3 different reasons to care about Richard's Tuesday routine. Now, you're thinking like a detective instead of a victim. Colin grinned, but there was something serious in his eyes. Just remember, revenge is a dish best served with plausible deniability. Whatever you're planning, make sure it can't be traced back to you. That afternoon, I created 3 separate email accounts using public computers at different locations around town. Each account had a generic name that could belong to anyone: concerned citizen, anonymous tipster, the kind of vague identity that made investigations difficult. The evidence packages I compiled were customized for each recipient. For Meridian Holdings' board of directors, I focused on corporate expense violations and misuse of company resources. The documentation showed a clear pattern of personal entertainment being charged to business accounts, complete with calendar evidence proving these weren't legitimate client meetings. For Elizabeth Thornton, I provided the full relationship timeline with hotel receipts and restaurant charges. I included enough detail to make the affair undeniable, but kept the tone professional rather than vindictive. Just facts, presented clearly. For Richard himself, I sent a simple message. Your Tuesday routine has been documented and shared with interested parties. Consider this a professional courtesy notification. All 3 emails were scheduled to send simultaneously on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., right when Richard would be preparing for his weekly accidental encounter with my wife. I spent the weekend in a strange state of calm. Catherine maintained her normal routine, reviewing case files and preparing for her Tuesday charity meeting. She seemed relaxed, even happy, humming while she made coffee and asking about my plans for the shop's expansion. The Riverside location is coming along nicely, I told her over Sunday breakfast. Should be operational by Christmas. That's wonderful, darling. You've worked so hard for this. The casual endearment stung more than outright hostility would have. She wasn't being cruel or dismissive. She was simply living in 2 separate worlds, and I only existed in one of them. Monday night, she laid out her clothes for the next day with extra care. The navy suit again, pressed and ready. The silk scarf that had become part of her Tuesday uniform. She spent longer than usual on her evening skincare routine, applying the expensive moisturizer she saved for special occasions. Big day tomorrow? I asked from the bedroom doorway. Just the usual charity meeting, but Janet wants to discuss the spring fundraiser, so it might run longer than normal. Janet. I'd almost forgotten about Janet Morrison, Catherine's supposed partner in these Tuesday ventures. I made a mental note to research her involvement later. For now, I had bigger concerns. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October wind that stripped leaves from trees and sent them skittering across parking lots like nervous animals. Catherine left the house at her usual time, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted like the expensive lipstick she'd started wearing to work. At exactly 9 a.m., I was at the West Side shop pretending to review parts orders while my phone counted down the minutes. The emails would be sending now, delivering their carefully compiled evidence to 3 different recipients, who each had their own reasons to care about Richard Thornton's extracurricular activities. My phone buzzed with a text message at 9:17 a.m. Emergency board meeting called. All senior staff required. Charity meeting canceled today. We'll explain later. C. I smiled for the first time in months. The avalanche had begun, and there was no stopping it now. The first crack in Richard Thornton's carefully constructed world appeared in the local business journal's afternoon edition. A small item buried on page 3. Meridian Holdings CEO, Richard Thornton, facing internal review regarding corporate expense policies. Board meeting scheduled to address concerns raised by anonymous whistleblower. I read the article twice while eating lunch at my desk, savoring every word like expensive wine. The journalist had been professional but thorough, noting that the review involved irregularities in entertainment expenses and potential misuse of corporate resources. No mention of affairs or hotels, just the dry language of corporate accountability that would make investors nervous and board members ask uncomfortable questions. My phone rang at 2:30. Catherine's voice was tight with controlled panic. "William, I need you to know that some malicious person has been spreading lies about me and Richard. Completely fabricated accusations about our professional relationship." "What kind of accusations?" "The kind that could damage both our reputations if people believe them. Someone sent Elizabeth Thornton a packet of fake receipts and doctored calendar entries, trying to make it look like Richard and I were having an inappropriate relationship." Fake receipts. Doctored calendar entries. Catherine's legal training was showing. Deny everything. Attack the evidence. Make the accusers prove their case. "That's terrible," I said, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Who would do something like that?" "We don't know yet, but Richard thinks it might be someone from his company, a disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble. The timing is suspicious, right when Meridian is negotiating that big acquisition deal." I made sympathetic noises while she continued explaining how this was all a misunderstanding, how she and Richard had only met a few times to discuss potential legal work, how the receipts must have been manipulated by someone with access to corporate accounts. "Elizabeth is being completely unreasonable about the whole thing," Catherine continued. "She's hired some expensive attorney and is making threats about divorce and asset protection. It's ridiculous." "Asset protection?" "Their prenuptial agreement has an infidelity clause. If Elizabeth can prove Richard was unfaithful, she gets a much larger settlement. But since there's no actual evidence of an affair, because there wasn't one, her lawyers are just posturing." The confidence in her voice was remarkable. Even facing documented proof of her Tuesday routine, Catherine was sticking to her story with the determination of someone who'd built a career on never admitting weakness. "What about the board review?" I asked. "Corporate nonsense. Some accountant probably flagged Richard's entertainment expenses as excessive, and now they have to investigate to cover themselves legally. It'll blow over once they realize the documentation was falsified." After she hung up, I sat in my office chair feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't disappointment either. Catherine was fighting back, which I'd expected. But she was also underestimating the quality of evidence arrayed against her, which suggested she didn't know who was really behind the leak. That evening brought the first real fireworks. I was at home helping Ethan with calculus homework when Catherine burst through the front door like a storm system. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and her hands were shaking with barely controlled rage. "That woman is insane," she announced, dropping her briefcase with enough force to rattle the hall table. "Elizabeth Thornton is completely unhinged." Olivia looked up from her phone with the keen interest teenagers reserve for adult drama. "What happened, Mom?" "She confronted me in the parking garage at work, started screaming about homewreckers and adultery, waving around some folder full of papers. I had to call building security." Catherine paced the kitchen while she talked, her nervous energy filling the space like electricity before a thunderstorm. She'd been publicly confronted, professionally embarrassed, and legally threatened all in the span of 8 hours. The controlled facade she'd maintained for months was finally cracking. "What did she say exactly?" I asked. "Horrible things. Accusations about Richard and me having some kind of relationship. She claimed to have proof, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, calendar entries. All fake, obviously, but she seemed to believe they were real." "Did you call the police?" "And tell them what? That a woman confronted me about fabricated evidence of an affair I'm not having? That would just give credibility to her delusions." Catherine stopped pacing long enough to pour herself a large glass of wine. "My partners are already asking questions. This kind of scandal could affect my position at the firm." The wine disappeared quickly, followed by a second glass. Catherine rarely drank during the week, but tonight felt like an exception to most of her usual rules. Maybe you should stay away from Richard until this blows over, I suggested carefully. I can't avoid him completely. We're in the middle of discussing a significant legal contract for Meridian Holdings. Walking away now would look like an admission of guilt. Even if the board review is ongoing? Catherine's laugh was bitter, especially because of the board review. Richard needs experienced legal counsel to navigate this situation, someone he can trust. Trust. The word hung in the air between us like an accusation neither of us was ready to make directly. Wednesday brought escalation. The morning news included a brief segment about Meridian Holdings' stock price dropping 3% following corporate governance concerns. The reporter mentioned that CEO Richard Thornton was facing an internal investigation regarding expense account irregularities, and that several board members had called for increased oversight of executive spending. I was watching this from the customer waiting area at my main shop when Patricia Vance walked in. I recognized her immediately from the corporate headshots on Meridian Holdings' website. Mid-40s, professionally dressed, with the tired eyes of someone who'd been keeping other people's secrets for too long. She approached the service counter where Tommy was handling customer check-ins. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for William Blackwood." My coffee suddenly tasted like metal. "That's me." She glanced around the waiting area, noting the other customers and employees within earshot. "Could we speak privately? It's about the information I sent you." We walked to my office, a cramped space behind the main service bay that smelled like motor oil and coffee. Patricia closed the door and sat down without being invited, her posture suggesting this wasn't a social call. "I wanted you to know that things are moving faster than I expected," she said without preamble. "The board meeting yesterday was intense." "How intense?" "Richard was suspended pending a full investigation. They've frozen his corporate credit cards and launched a forensic audit of his expense accounts. The acquisition deal he was negotiating has been put on hold indefinitely." I kept my expression neutral, but inside I felt a surge of something that might have been vindication. That seems like a strong response to some questionable receipts. It wasn't just the receipts. Once the board started digging, they found other irregularities. Richard had been creative with his entertainment expenses for years, not just the Tuesday meetings with your wife, golf trips that weren't business-related, dinner charges for personal friends, hotel rooms for weekend getaways that had nothing to do with company business. Patricia opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "I brought you copies of everything they found. Figured you might want to know the full scope of what your wife was involved in." The documents she showed me painted a picture of systematic expense account abuse stretching back 3 years. Richard had been treating Meridian Holdings like his personal entertainment fund, charging everything from family vacations to anniversary dinners to the corporate account. The Tuesday meetings with Catherine were just the most recent and regular example of his creative accounting. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I spent 12 years working for that man, watching him take credit for other people's work while treating his staff like furniture. He never remembered my name, never acknowledged my contributions, never showed the slightest consideration for anyone below his executive level." Patricia's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched. "When I saw the pattern with your wife's meetings, I realized I finally had documentation that could bring him down." "And Elizabeth Thornton?" "She's filing for divorce today. Her attorney says the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause will give her about 60% of their assets, plus alimony. Richard's going to lose his job, his wife, and most of his money all in the same week." I studied Patricia's face, looking for signs of regret or satisfaction. What I saw was mostly exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying anger for too long. "What happens to you?" I asked. "I'll be fine. I've got another job lined up, and my employment contract includes a generous severance package if my position is eliminated due to executive changes." She smiled for the first time since entering my office. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people destroy themselves with their own poor choices. After she left, I sat alone in my office thinking about cascading failures. In mechanical systems, one broken component could trigger a chain reaction that brought down the entire engine. Richard's Tuesday routine had been the first component to fail, but the system had been unstable for years. All it took was the right pressure applied at the right moment to bring everything crashing down. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Can you pick up Olivia from school? Emergency at work. We'll explain tonight." I wondered what new crisis had erupted in her carefully managed world, and whether she was beginning to understand that some accidents have consequences that extend far beyond the initial collision. Thursday evening brought the conversation I'd been both dreading and anticipating for weeks. Catherine arrived home after 9 p.m., looking like she'd been through a professional hurricane. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, makeup faded, hair escaping from its careful styling, and her hands shaking slightly as she set down her briefcase. The kids were upstairs doing homework, leaving us alone in the kitchen for what felt like the first honest conversation we'd had in months. "Richard was fired today," she said without preamble, pouring herself a glass of wine with the mechanical precision of someone going through familiar motions. "The board voted unanimously to terminate his employment effective immediately." I leaned against the kitchen counter, maintaining careful distance. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" The question came out sharper than she'd probably intended. "Because someone has been systematically destroying both our reputations, and I'm starting to wonder who benefits from that destruction." The accusation hung between us like a challenge. Catherine was finally dropping the pretense of innocent confusion and moving into attack mode. Her legal training was taking over, looking for someone to blame and building a case for her own defense. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm suggesting that someone with access to detailed financial records and a personal grudge has been orchestrating this entire situation. Someone who knew exactly which evidence to compile and which people to send it to for maximum damage." She was closer to the truth than she realized, but still missing the most important piece. Catherine thought this was about revenge, and she wasn't wrong, but she didn't understand that the real architect of Richard's downfall had been Patricia Vance, not me. I'd just been the delivery mechanism. "Maybe Richard's downfall has nothing to do with you," I said carefully. "Maybe he was always heading for this kind of trouble, and your association with him was just bad timing." Catherine's laugh was bitter. "Bad timing? Right. William, I need you to be honest with me. Have you been investigating my activities? Following me? Hiring private detectives?" The direct question deserved a direct answer, even if it wasn't the complete truth. "I know about the Tuesday meetings," I said. "The restaurant, the hotel, the whole routine. I know it's been going on for months, and I know it wasn't about charity work or legal consultations." Catherine went very still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in around us. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "Long enough." "And you didn't say anything? Didn't confront me or demand explanations?" "I was waiting to see how far you'd take it, whether you'd come clean on your own or keep lying to my face every week." Catherine set down her wine glass with deliberate care, then turned to face me fully. The mask of professional composure was completely gone now, replaced by something rawer and more dangerous. "So you decided to destroy Richard's career instead? Ruin his marriage? Cost him his job and his reputation?" "I didn't destroy anything. Richard destroyed himself by using company money to fund his extramarital activities. All I did was make sure the right people knew about it." "You sent those documents to Elizabeth, to the board, to God knows who else. I made sure people who had a legitimate interest in Richard's behavior were informed about it. His wife deserved to know. His company's board deserved to know. The consequences were his own making." Catherine stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. You're not the man I married. The William I married would have confronted me directly, demanded we work things out, gone to marriage counseling. He wouldn't have orchestrated some elaborate revenge scheme. The Catherine I married wouldn't have been having an affair for months while lying about charity meetings every Tuesday. The words hit like a slap. Catherine flinched, then recovered quickly, her attorney instincts kicking in. Fine. You want honesty? Yes, I was seeing Richard. Yes, we were having an affair, but it wasn't some grand romance or emotional betrayal. It was just excitement, something different from the routine we'd fallen into. Excitement. Don't say it like that. You have no idea what it's like to be married to someone who sees you as a fixture instead of a person. When was the last time you looked at me like you actually wanted me? When did we stop talking about anything except schedules and logistics? The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be effective. We had fallen into routines, taken each other for granted, let the daily mechanics of marriage replace whatever passion had brought us together originally. So you decided to find excitement with your ex-boyfriend instead of talking to your husband about it. I tried talking to you. Remember last spring when I suggested we take that weekend trip to Napa? You said you were too busy with the new shop location. Remember when I asked if we could start having dinner together without the kids once a week? You said it seemed unnecessary since we already lived together. I did remember those conversations, though I'd interpreted them differently at the time. Catherine had seemed to be asking for more structured time together, which felt artificial to me. I thought marriage was supposed to be comfortable, easy, natural. I hadn't realized she was asking for attention, for effort, for proof that I still saw her as more than a co-parent and financial partner. That doesn't justify what you did, I said. No, it doesn't, but it explains it. Richard made me feel interesting again, desirable, like someone worth making an effort for. Catherine's voice softened slightly. He sent flowers to my office. He remembered details about cases I was working on. He asked questions about my day and actually listened to the answers, while using his company's money to pay for hotel rooms. I didn't know about the expense account issues. I thought he was paying for everything personally. Would it have mattered if you'd known? Catherine considered this for a long moment. Probably not. I wasn't thinking about the practical details. I was thinking about how it felt to be pursued again, to be wanted instead of just present. We stood in silence for several minutes, both processing the conversation we'd been avoiding for months. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, reminding us that winter was coming whether we were ready for it or not. What happens now? Catherine asked finally. That depends on what you want to happen. I want to fix this. I want to go back to before everything got so complicated and try again. Richard's career is finished. Elizabeth is divorcing him and taking most of his assets. Your affair is going to be public record in the divorce proceedings. There's no going back to before. I meant us. Our marriage. I want to try to fix what we broke. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, still intelligent, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. But she was also someone who'd been living a double life for months, lying to my face every Tuesday while planning secret meetings with another man. I don't know if that's possible, I said honestly, because of what I did or because of what you did in response. Both, I thought, but didn't say. Because trust, once broken, was harder to repair than any mechanical system I'd ever worked on. And because I'd discovered something about myself during this whole ordeal, I was capable of cold, calculated revenge in ways that surprised even me. We should probably talk to the kids, I said instead. This is going to get messy, and they deserve to know what's happening before they hear it from someone else. Catherine nodded, tears finally starting to flow. How do we explain this to them? How do we tell Ethan and Olivia that their parents made such a mess of everything? Carefully, honestly, and with the understanding that some mistakes have consequences that affect more than just the people who made them. As if summoned by our conversation, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking between us with the kind of awareness that reminded me he was almost an adult. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "You guys have been talking for a while and Mom looks upset." Catherine wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, shifting back into mother mode despite everything else that was happening. "We need to have a family meeting," she said. "Could you get your sister? There are some things we need to discuss." As Ethan headed upstairs to retrieve Olivia, I wondered how we were going to explain to our children that sometimes accidents do repeat, that patterns matter more than intentions, and that the consequences of our choices don't always stay contained within the boundaries we think we've drawn around them. The family meeting that Friday night was one of the most difficult conversations I'd ever had. Catherine and I sat across from Ethan and Olivia at our dining room table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals and homework sessions and birthday celebrations. Now it felt like a conference room where we were about to deliver devastating news to clients. Olivia sensed the gravity immediately, setting down her phone without being asked. Ethan sat with his arms crossed, his expression already guarded in the way teenagers perfect when they suspect adults are about to complicate their lives. "Your father and I are having some serious problems in our marriage," Catherine began, her attorney training helping her find the right words. "We've both made mistakes, and we're going to need some time to figure out how to move forward." "Are you getting divorced?" Olivia asked bluntly. "We don't know yet," I answered honestly. "We're going to try counseling first, but we wanted you both to know that things might be different around here for a while." Ethan studied our faces with the kind of careful attention he usually reserved for complex math problems. "This is about Mom's Tuesday meetings, isn't it?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. Catherine went pale, while I felt my stomach drop somewhere around my shoes. "What do you know about the Tuesday meetings?" Catherine asked carefully. "I know they weren't really charity committee meetings," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Janet Morrison called here 3 weeks ago looking for you, said she hadn't seen you at the charity meeting that Tuesday. When I told you about it, you said there must have been some confusion about the schedule." Catherine closed her eyes briefly. Even our 17-year-old son had been keeping track of her lies better than she'd realized. "Also," Olivia added with the casual cruelty that teenagers excel at, "Ashley's mom works at the Grandview Hotel. She mentioned seeing you there a few times with some older guy who wasn't Dad. I didn't think much about it at first, but—" The silence stretched out like a held breath. Both kids were looking at us with a mixture of disappointment and resignation that made me feel ancient and foolish. "Mom was seeing someone else," I said finally. "We're trying to work through it, but it's complicated." "Is that why Richard Thornton got fired?" Ethan asked. "It was all over social media yesterday. Kids at school were saying he got caught stealing money or something." Catherine winced. The local news had covered Richard's termination, though they'd been discreet about the specific reasons. But in a city this size, rumors traveled faster than official statements. "Mr. Thornton was using his company's money inappropriately," I explained. "The affair was part of it, but there were other financial irregularities too." "So you got him fired?" Olivia asked, looking directly at me. "I provided information to people who had a right to know about it. The company made their own decisions about what to do with that information." Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing everything we'd told them. "Are you proud of yourself, Dad, for destroying that guy's life?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected anger about the affair, confusion about our marriage, maybe resentment about the disruption to their lives. I hadn't expected moral judgment about my response to Catherine's betrayal. "I'm not proud of the situation," I said carefully, "but I'm not ashamed of making sure the truth came out either. Even if it meant Mom's reputation got damaged too, even if it affects our family. Your mother made choices that were going to affect our family regardless. I just made sure those choices had appropriate consequences." Olivia looked between us with the kind of disgusted expression that only teenagers can perfect. This is so stupid. You're both acting like children. Mom cheated, Dad got revenge, and now you're going to drag us through some messy divorce because neither of you knows how to communicate like adults. We're not definitely getting divorced, Catherine said quickly. Right. You're just going to stay married and make everyone miserable instead. That's so much better. The sarcasm in Olivia's voice reminded me uncomfortably of my own tendency toward cutting remarks. Apparently, our children had inherited more from us than just eye color and mechanical aptitude. What do you want us to do? I asked them both. Pretend none of this happened? Go back to the way things were? I want you to figure out whether you actually want to be married to each other, or if you're just staying together because it's easier than splitting up, Ethan said with startling maturity. Because if you don't want to be together, then get divorced and move on. But if you do want to make it work, then actually make an effort instead of just going through the motions. Catherine reached across the table and took his hand. When did you get so wise? When I started watching you guys drift apart over the past year and wondering if either of you was going to do anything about it. After the kids went to bed, Catherine and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen again, both emotionally drained from the conversation. They're handling this better than I expected, she said. They're good kids. We did something right, even if we messed up everything else. Catherine poured herself another glass of wine, then hesitated and put the bottle away. I should probably stop drinking through this situation. It's not helping my judgment. When did you start feeling like we were just going through the motions? I asked. Honestly? About 2 years ago, maybe longer. It wasn't any specific moment, just a gradual realization that we'd become roommates who happened to be married. We stopped talking about interesting things, stopped making plans together, stopped seeing each other as people instead of just roles. I thought about this, trying to pinpoint when I'd started taking Catherine for granted instead of appreciating her as a partner. I stopped asking about your cases, I realized. You used to tell me about interesting legal problems, and I used to actually listen. When did I start just nodding and changing the subject? Around the time I stopped asking about the technical challenges at your shops. We both got lazy about being interested in each other's work. And then Richard started asking about your cases. Yes. And he remembered the details when I brought them up later. It felt like someone was actually paying attention to me for the first time in years. We sat in silence for a while, both contemplating the slow erosion of attention and effort that had created the space for Catherine's affair to develop. I don't know if we can fix this, I said eventually, because you can't forgive me, or because you don't want to? Because I don't know if I can trust you again, and because I don't know if you can forgive me for what I did to Richard. Catherine considered this. What you did to Richard was calculated and devastating, but it was also proportional, I suppose. He made choices that had consequences, and you made sure those consequences actually happened. That sounds like lawyer speak for justified revenge. Maybe it was justified. Maybe Richard deserved what happened to him. But the way you went about it, the planning, the patience, the precision, it showed me a side of you I'd never seen before. A cold side. She wasn't wrong. I had been cold, calculating, methodical in my approach to destroying Richard's career and marriage. I'd enjoyed watching the pieces fall into place, enjoyed seeing him face consequences for his actions. That capacity for calculated revenge was part of me now, and we both knew it. So where does that leave us? I asked. In counseling, if we're serious about trying to repair this marriage, and probably in therapy individually, because we both have things to work through that go beyond just the affair. And if counseling doesn't work? Then we get divorced like civilized adults and try to minimize the damage to Ethan and Olivia. It wasn't the most romantic foundation for attempting to rebuild a marriage, but it was honest. We were two people who'd hurt each other deeply, trying to figure out if the relationship was worth salvaging or if we'd be better off starting over separately. I'll find a counselor, I said. I'll call my attorney and make sure the Richard situation doesn't create any professional complications for me. Very romantic. Catherine almost smiled. We'll work on the romance later. Right now, we need to focus on the basics, like whether we can have a conversation without lying to each other. That night, we slept in the same bed for the first time in weeks, but with careful distance between us. Not touching, but not actively avoiding contact either. It felt like a small step toward something that might eventually become trust again. Outside, the October wind continued rattling the windows, reminding us that some storms pass quickly while others settle in for the long haul. We were about to find out which kind we were facing. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, I was reviewing quarterly reports at my main shop when Patricia Vance called with an update I hadn't expected. "Richard's working at a used car lot on the east side of town," she said without preamble, "selling pre-owned vehicles for $12 an hour plus commission." I set down my coffee, trying to process this information. That's quite a career change. Elizabeth got 68% of their assets in the divorce settlement: the house, the investment accounts, the vacation property in Colorado. Richard's living in a one-bedroom apartment and driving a 15-year-old Honda with a dented bumper. There was satisfaction in Patricia's voice, but also something that might have been pity. Even justified revenge could look excessive when you saw the final results. "What about the criminal charges?" I asked. The district attorney had been investigating Richard's expense account irregularities, though most legal experts thought he'd probably face civil rather than criminal penalties. "Plea agreement. He's paying restitution to Meridian Holdings and doing community service, but no jail time. The company wanted to avoid the publicity of a trial, so they settled for getting their money back." "And you?" "I'm doing well. New job, better boss, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes people actually face consequences for treating their employees poorly." Patricia paused. "How are things with your wife?" Catherine and I had been in marriage counseling for 2 months, working through the complicated process of rebuilding trust while figuring out whether we actually wanted to stay married. It was slow, difficult work that required more emotional honesty than either of us had practiced in years. "We're making progress," I said, which was true but incomplete. The progress was real but fragile. We'd learned to have conversations about difficult topics without immediately attacking each other. Catherine had quit her job at the law firm, partly because of the scandal, but mostly because she wanted to start her own practice and have more control over her schedule. I'd promoted Tommy to manager of the West Side location, giving myself more flexibility to be present for the marriage counseling sessions and family activities. But trust was still elusive. Catherine had moved back into our bedroom, but we maintained careful emotional distance. We were polite, cooperative, even occasionally warm with each other. But the easy intimacy we'd once shared felt like something that had belonged to different people. The kids were handling the situation better than expected. Ethan had been accepted to 3 universities and was planning to study engineering. Olivia had channeled her dramatic tendencies into the school theater program and was starring in the spring production of Much Ado About Nothing. Both of them treated our marriage counseling like a home improvement project, necessary maintenance that would hopefully prevent bigger problems later. "Dad seems happier," Olivia had observed the previous week. "Less angry all the time." She was right. The cold rage that had driven my campaign against Richard had dissipated, leaving me feeling more like myself again. Not the same person I'd been before discovering Catherine's affair, but not the calculating stranger I'd become during those weeks of planning revenge either. After Patricia hung up, I sat in my office thinking about consequences and proportionality. Richard Thornton had lost his career, his marriage, most of his money, and his social standing. Catherine had lost her job, her reputation in certain circles, and the comfortable assumption that her secrets would stay hidden. I'd lost my faith in the permanence of marriage and gained an uncomfortable awareness of my own capacity for methodical cruelty. The affair had been like dropping a stone into still water. The initial splash was dramatic, but the ripples continued spreading long after the stone had sunk to the bottom. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Counseling session moved to 3 p.m. today. Dr. Martinez had a scheduling conflict. Dr. Martinez was our marriage counselor, a patient woman in her 50s who specialized in helping couples rebuild relationships after major betrayals. She'd been working with us on communication patterns, trust exercises, and what she called intentional intimacy, the deliberate choice to be vulnerable with each other instead of just coexisting. "See you there," I texted back. That afternoon's session focused on forgiveness, a topic we'd been circling around for weeks without directly addressing. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it wasn't important, Dr. Martinez explained. It's about choosing to release the anger and resentment so they don't continue poisoning your relationship. "I don't know if I can forgive William for what he did to Richard," Catherine said. "Not because Richard didn't deserve consequences, but because of how calculated and thorough William's revenge was. It showed me a side of him that frightens me." "And I don't know if I can forgive Catherine for the lying," I responded. "Not just the affair itself, but the months of looking me in the eye every Tuesday and telling elaborate stories about charity meetings. The deception feels worse than the betrayal." Dr. Martinez nodded. "You're both struggling with the discovery that your spouse is capable of behavior you didn't expect. Catherine, you learned that William can be coldly vengeful when he feels wronged. William, you learned that Catherine can maintain complex deceptions while appearing completely trustworthy. So how do we move past that?" Catherine asked. "By deciding whether you can accept these new aspects of each other as part of who your spouse really is, rather than aberrations to be ignored or fixed." It was an uncomfortable question. Could I love a version of Catherine that included the capacity for elaborate deception? Could she love a version of me that included the ability to systematically destroy someone's life when I felt justified in doing so? "I think," I said slowly, "that maybe we're both more complicated people than we pretended to be during the comfortable years of our marriage. Maybe the affair and the revenge were just extreme expressions of parts of ourselves we'd been keeping hidden." Catherine looked at me with something that might have been recognition. "You mean I was always capable of deception, and you were always capable of revenge, but we just never had reasons to act on those capacities before?" "Something like that." Dr. Martinez smiled slightly. "That's actually a very mature insight. Most people prefer to think of betrayal and revenge as temporary insanity rather than expressions of authentic but hidden aspects of personality. So we're both potentially terrible people who happen to create circumstances that brought out the worst in each other?" Catherine asked. "Or you're both complex people who are capable of both love and cruelty, depending on the circumstances," Dr. Martinez suggested. "The question is whether you can build a relationship that accounts for that complexity instead of pretending it doesn't exist." After the session, Catherine and I drove home in thoughtful silence. The January afternoon was gray and cold, with the kind of overcast sky that made everything look muted and uncertain. "I've been thinking about what Ethan said," Catherine said as we pulled into our driveway. "About whether we actually want to be married to each other, or if we're just staying together because it's easier than splitting up. And I think I do want to be married to you. Not the version of you I thought I knew before all this happened, but the actual you, the one who's capable of both building something from nothing and tearing someone down when they cross you." I considered this. "Even though that version of me scares you sometimes? Even though, what about you? Do you want to stay married to someone who's capable of maintaining elaborate lies while appearing completely trustworthy?" "I think so. As long as you're using that capacity for something other than cheating on me." Catherine laughed, and for the first time in months, it sounded genuinely amused rather than bitter or sarcastic. "I'll try to channel my deceptive abilities toward more constructive purposes," she said. "Maybe surprise parties instead of secret affairs." I'll try to use my vengeful tendencies on people who actually deserve them instead of just anyone who happens to cross our family. It wasn't the most romantic conversation we'd ever had, but it felt honest in a way our relationship hadn't been for years. We were finally talking to each other like adults who understood that marriage was more complicated than just loving someone. It also required accepting them, including the parts that weren't particularly lovable. That evening, we had dinner as a family for the first time since the October crisis. Ethan talked about his college plans, Olivia complained about her chemistry teacher, and Catherine and I managed to have a normal conversation about expanding the business to include hybrid vehicle service. It felt almost ordinary, which seemed like a small miracle after months of careful politeness and therapeutic conversations. Later, as we were cleaning up the kitchen, Catherine asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just confronted me directly instead of orchestrating Richard's downfall?" "Sometimes. What do you think would have happened?" "Honestly, I probably would have lied, denied everything, and gotten better at hiding the affair. I wasn't ready to give up the excitement, and I wasn't ready to face the consequences of my choices. So the public exposure was necessary? Maybe. It forced both of us to deal with reality instead of just managing our separate versions of the truth." I thought about this as we finished loading the dishwasher. Perhaps the affair and the revenge had been necessary distractions, clearing away the comfortable lies we'd been telling ourselves so we could build something more honest in their place. "Accidents don't repeat," I said, echoing the phrase that had started this whole cascade of consequences. "No," Catherine agreed, "but sometimes people do learn from them." Outside, the January wind rattled the windows with less violence than the October storms that had accompanied our crisis. Spring was still months away, but the worst of the winter weather was behind us. We were learning to live with the knowledge of what we were both capable of: deception and revenge, betrayal and calculated cruelty. But we were also learning that those capacities didn't have to define us, as long as we remained honest about their existence. It wasn't the marriage we'd started with, but it might be a stronger one, built on truth instead of comfortable assumptions, acceptance instead of willful blindness. Only time would tell if that foundation would prove more durable than the one we'd accidentally destroyed with our Tuesday patterns and their inevitable consequences.